Yeah, thanks, Tim. So me again. I'm going to talk about containers and the open science pool. By containers, I specifically mean containers for jobs, because we can also run execution points in containers, but that's a completely separate topic. So this is a feature that we've had for over half a decade now, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how they worked in the past. We've also done a lot of work over it in the past 2 years. We've got plans for the future. So up until about 2 years ago, so when I say containers in the OSPool, I really mean singularity containers in the OSPool. Condor has had Docker Universe for a long time, but running Docker jobs requires privileges that none of our pilots have. So really, it's just singularity or nothing. And singularity has two kinds of image formats. There's a CIF file, which is a single file, and a sandbox, which is a directory tree. And back in 2017, CIF files were just too large to transfer for tens of thousands of jobs, so they weren't really an option. Also, there were many sites that didn't support running CIF files because that also required special privileges. So instead, we used the directory tree format, and we distributed them through CVMFS, which is essentially a shared file system for DHDC. And the nice thing about CVMFS is that only the files in the container that the jobs actually use got transferred, so it saved a ton of network. Users can't directly write to the CVMFS area. Instead, what they do is they tell OSG staff what image they want to use, and they got to point to an image in a public Docker registry like Docker Hub. We have an automated cron job that pulls each image that we know about, converts it, adds it to CVMFS. Once that's done, in their submit file, the user specifies a path to the CVMFS directory in their singularity image custom attribute. But by 2021, there were a ton of sites out there that had singularity, but we had no way of using it because we couldn't get our images to those sites because they didn't have CVMFS. By 2021, we also had a mature caching infrastructure, OSDF, though at the time I think we were still calling it stash cache. So maybe it was time to revisit use of CIF files since it could solve the transfer problems. But we still had the problem that not all sites supported CIF files. So this gave us essentially a Venn diagram of sites. Some of them could get our images through CVMFS. Some of them could get it through OSDF and run the CIF files. Some of them could do both, but we had to pick and choose based on where we want to run. And so how do we handle this and how do we handle this while being transparent to the user? So the computer science way of doing it is to add a layer of indirection. We still have the cron job that converts a Docker registry image to a singularity sandbox, but now it also converts to a CIF file and adds it to the OSDF. The user keeps specifying the CVMFS path in their singularity images, but once their job lands on an EP where getting the CIF file via OSDF is better, the EP will download the CIF and use it instead of CVMFS. Instead of CVMFS. In addition, the EP has basically a cache. There's one cache for each EP where it keeps the downloaded CIF files. This is both so that the same CIF file doesn't need to get downloaded from multiple jobs running on the same EP, and also to not charge the user for the disk space that they did not know they needed. And this has been in production since mid-2021. I'm going to switch tack a bit and talk about implementation. There's a lot of code here. I'm going to talk about where all of this is run. And basically, until this year, this ran in a thing called the user job wrapper. For those of you who don't know, the user job wrapper is essentially a script that runs on the EP. It's defined by the EP admin that essentially replaces the user's executable. So Condor runs it instead of the user's executable. The wrapper can do some setups, do some teardown, and it's responsible for running the user's executable in between those two. And in fact, it wasn't HD Condor that was launching Singularity for these jobs. It was the job wrapper that the OSPool ran. So the problem with job wrappers is that they're essentially a black box to Condor. Condor knows that it's a job wrapper, but doesn't know when the wrapper starts, doesn't know when the wrapper ends, and the user job begins. Doesn't know whether an error comes from the wrapper or the user job. Doesn't know if standard out, standard error output comes from the wrapper or the user job. And of course, if Condor doesn't know, Condor doesn't let the user know. Now, a specific problem with the OSPool user job wrapper is Condor definitely didn't know that the job was running in Singularity under its behind its back. And so the user standard error files got polluted with messages from Singularity. Condor SSH job didn't work. Again, Condor didn't know that Singularity was running, so Condor landed the SSH session outside of the image instead of inside the image. And also, just on a technical debt side, it's 800 lines of bash, which is way too much bash. Yeah, but I wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't fix it. So by 2023, Condor's own Singularity support had matured a lot, and in fact, all of the pretty much all of the features that we needed to launch Singularity jobs, Condor could do natively. So we went through the job wrapper. We took an inventory of what needed to be done when, and we found out that the majority of the tasks could actually be done before the pilot even started. They didn't have to be done per job. They could just, be done as prep and encoded in Condor config. And then, Condor would take care of using all the stuff that was detected. The one thing that still needed to be done per job is the fancy downloading stuff of fetching the image through either CVMFS or OSDF. And for that, we used what's called a prepare job hook. Now, prepare job hook, job hooks are actually not a new technology. They've been in Condor since like 7.6, but I bet most of you haven't heard of them, which is too bad because they're kind of neat. Unlike the like the user job wrapper, runs on the execute point defined by the admin, runs before each job. Unlike the user job wrapper, it runs in a separate stage. Condor knows when it's the job hook that's being run. Condor knows when it's the user's job that's being run. Condor can distinguish between errors and output between the two and report to the user appropriately. And the way job hooks can basically control the execution of the job is they can adjust the job ads that are running on the EP and that are telling Condor what to do. So essentially, we moved all the download code from the user job wrapper to a prepared job hook that we wrote. Still does all the caching, still does all the, still does all the caching, but after the download is done, it will edit the job ad that Condor is looking at and change the Singularity, change the location of the Singularity image that Condor actually starts up. So all of this is technical behind the scenes details. Now I want to mention how this looks to the user. And I guess we deployed this in February of this year. And for the most part, users shouldn't really see a difference, or at least users shouldn't need to change their behavior. They still supply plus Singularity in their job files. But one thing they might have noticed if you're checking out their standard error files, hey, there's a lot less spam in there about /lizard not found, whatever that is. Condor SSH to job now actually works. I can't guarantee it'll work everywhere, but I can guarantee that it won't fail everywhere either. So now I talked about what we did. Now I talk a bit about what's up next. Container universe, really cool Condor feature. We got it working on the APs managed by OSG staff. So these are the ones at UChicago and UW. And we would like, but there are people that have their own access points that still make use of OSPool resources, and we don't want to leave them out in the cold. a lot of this work was exploratory, and so we made a lot of Condor sends essentially doing all of this quickly. For example, management of the EP image cache, we don't. Files are kept in there until the pilot expires. And the reason we haven't been bitten by that in the OSPool is because OSPool pilots don't really last all that long, usually no longer than 24 hours. The other one is having HT Condor manage the CIF image transfer. Right now, it's all being done in stash cp and bash, and like half of my previous talk was trying to convince you not to do that. So we shouldn't do that either. But I think the biggest thing is this is all OSPool special sauce, and we need to spend the time to make it less special, because I think this is useful by a much larger audience, by other people that run their own DHTC pools, and we want to make sure that they can use it and they can use it easily. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.